summer morning in Vaucluse, a woman calls for help after her husband is shot in bed. She mentions an intruder and claims innocence, but months later is convicted of murder. Miscarriage of justice or a cleverly crafted lie? For more than 20 years, Gegere, one of the biggest lawyers of our generation, has been fighting to understand what really happened. Behind every crime lies a story more complex than the verdict. Innocence convicted, guilty freed, truths warped by emotion, doubt or fear. A criminal lawyer for decades, Mark has been through the worst cases. Staged murders, unexplained disappearances, children accused, families destroyed, and clients who confessed the unthinkable to him. He has defended forgotten innocence and confronted remorseless criminals in court. And sometimes he even doubted himself and what he thought he knew. How can you tell if your client is lying to you or telling you the truth? Did he really kill him? Tonight, he opens his office doors and reveals his most troubling cases. What he saw, heard, and justice never reveals. Make yourself comfortable, turn off the lights, and get ready to discover what the black robe sometimes hides. The truths people don't want to hear. The worst cases a lawyer can handle in his career. Welcome to Story Cube, True Crime Special.
Then he bursts into tears and says, "But sir, I didn't kill my dad. It was an accident." The little girl drowned in the Rhône. We're in Avignon. The Rhône runs along the edge of the city. She drowned in the Rhône. And then, little by little, he will explain that, in fact, he killed his daughter. One of the saddest and most revealing cases of human madness that I have ever had to plead.
Hello everyone. Today on StoryCube, we're joined by a lawyer with 37 years of experience. Today, I thought it would be interesting for him to revisit some cases from his career. There are some really interesting, fascinating things, and I thought it would be cool for him to talk about them a bit, and for him to tell us what really happened. He recently released a book, The Survivors, about 11 cases he worked on. What's it about?
It's about families I helped after they lost someone to a dramatic murder, whether it was a child, a father, a mother, a sister, or a brother. And it's also 11 examples of how the justice system can handle this kind of case.
You sent us the Alessandrie case, which I believe occupied you for almost 20 years. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
One morning in Vaucluse, a woman calls for help after her husband is shot in bed. She mentions an intruder, insists she's innocent, yet will still be convicted. What actually happened?
It's an incredible case. It's the early 90s in Vaucluse, and it's a couple of golden boys. That is to say, he's the manager of an Intermarché which he took over and turned around. He works very well. It's the day after a party, which is the Melon Festival in Cavaillon, and he keeps telling everyone that he killed it that day and so on. And then during the night, a gunshot rings out. This woman wakes up and realizes that her husband is lying in a pool of his own blood because he was shot with a shotgun. Inside the house, there are two children. Bryce, whom I'll be talking about, is the couple's child, and then Johan, who is a child from Madame Alessandrie's previous marriage. So the emergency services arrive, of course, and we start asking a lot of questions, and then pretty quickly the emergency services. In any case, the police are going to think it's strange because for an outside intrusion, there are no signs of a break-in. So there's immediately going to be some doubt about whether it was a gang of criminals who came, which would have been entirely plausible. Because at that time, in our region, there were quite a few stories like that, where criminals would break into shopkeepers' homes, take the family hostage, grab the manager, and go to the shop or store with him to get what was in the safe, while the other accomplices kept the family under control. However, that's not what is going to happen.
So what do they think? Do they suspect she might have...
They quickly assume it's a family matter, that something happened inside the house among those present, either the wife or one of the two children.
How old are they?
At the time, that's what I was going to say. At the time, Bryce, whom I will be assisting throughout this period, he is 11. Johan is a bit older, 17 I think, yes, 17 then. And the problem with this case, as is often the case with miscarriages of justice, is that the investigators start with the conviction that it was done by someone from the inside. They'll try to make the evidence fit the conviction, even though there won't be any evidence. For example, this man is shot with a shotgun, but there is no shotgun or weapon in the house. There are many things like that which are problematic. And then eventually, after a while, they will end up putting all three of them in custody, or more precisely, the two of them. They're waiting for Johan to turn 18 so they can put him in custody. They put the woman in custody. And they're going to put Bryce in judicial detention because at that time he's not of age, so they can't put him in custody. But he's still going to spend 24 hours in an office surrounded by police officers, and they're going to ask him some particularly tough questions.
Had you already gotten involved at that point?
No, I wasn't involved then because nothing was happening at that time, except that an investigation will be opened afterward. Mrs. Alessandrie Edwige will be indicted in this case by an investigating judge and held in pre-trial detention.
Hi, this is Noah from the future, explaining for anyone who didn't understand. The police are so convinced the mother killed the husband that she's already in pre-trial detention. She's the main suspect and allegedly killed her husband, leaving Bryce alone. He has no parents now. His mother is in detention. What happens next is unbelievable.
From there, the child Bryce will be placed in her care. Not precisely placed, but he will be entrusted to the president of the General Council then, because he is what we call an ad hoc administrator. That means when your father is dead and your mother is suspected of having killed your father, since you're a minor, you can't be represented by either. The president of the General Council will represent you at the proceedings, and that's where I come in, since I will be appointed by this president of the General Council to defend Bryce. And I will always remember the first time I met this boy.
Bryce, is he the little one?
Yes, he's the youngest. He's 11. When the case began and his mother was indicted, he was about 12 and a half. I see a little boy who's completely lost, actually, covered in eczema, scratching himself all over, who is clearly really unwell. And very quickly I become convinced that it couldn't have happened from the inside, because this child has an overwhelming love for his father. You can imagine what a father means to a 12-year-old boy. He's the role model and hero. And I tell myself that if something had happened, no matter what, maybe an accident, an argument that went wrong, he wouldn't have been able to keep going and keep saying, "That's not my mother, that's not my mother." Besides, there's a moment that's absolutely horrible when he's questioned. They're going to do ink prints. I don't know if you know what that is. That means actually when there's a crime scene with a gunshot, when the gun is fired, when the bullet leaves, there are molten firing particles that get deposited. It's microscopic and settles on the person who fired as well as throughout the room. And they'll use the black swabs and find a few firing particles on him, but the firing particles are extremely volatile. If you're in a room where a shot was fired, if I touch you, I'll get some on me. And at some point, I'll always remember that question, and especially the answer he gave. The police officer asks him, "You have gunshot residue on you. How do you explain that?" He then breaks down in tears saying, "But sir, I didn't kill my dad." He doesn't say, "I didn't kill my father." He says, "I didn't kill my dad." Because he's 12 and a child. And we're going to make him go through something absolutely horrible during this whole period. So I meet him, and right away I become convinced that it can't be inside. And clearly there's something wrong with this story. Nevertheless, this woman will be tried for the first time in Avignon, found guilty and sentenced. She will appeal and be retried in Nîmes. And then at that moment a top lawyer will step in for her, since it's Thierry Lévy. He has since passed away, but he was one of the great lawyers of France.
After her initial conviction, what final conclusion do we reach? They conclude she killed her husband and tried to cover it up.
In fact, they're going to try to show that there was a conflict in the couple. They're going to try to show that she was jealous of her husband, that maybe her husband was having affairs elsewhere. They're going to try to find a motive actually for this crime. But it's not just because they argued at work, because they worked together. They argued at their workplace. That doesn't mean you want to kill your husband. Plus, many things just don't make sense. We can see that they made love that very night since we found one. Anyway, I won't go into the sordid details, but there are a lot of things that make it seem unbelievable. Once again, there isn't a rifle in that house. None at all. And she's actually going to be convicted. By default, since they can't find anything else, that's apparently their most plausible explanation. But
she's the one who actually called the...
Yes, she calls for help. And when she does, even that when she calls for help, she was completely panicked, feeling her husband's warm blood running over her. That's something. You have to put yourself in the context. It's absolutely horrible. And she calls and I think she says, "Sir, they've killed my husband. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore," etc. Then everything will turn against her. For example, when the firefighters arrive first, they find her crouched naked in the bathroom, covered in blood. The firefighter tells her to take a shower, which will backfire on her, because they're going to say, "But you washed yourself to get rid of the fact that you had gunshot residue on you," when that's not the case at all. And all of this will mean that little by little, they're going to build up this woman's guilt. So she's going to be convicted in Avignon for that. She's going to appeal this decision. She will be tried again in Nimes and convicted once more. And on top of that, sentenced to 10 years. If you kill your husband in front of his own children, you don't get 10 years. You get 15 years, you get 20 years, you get a heavy sentence, because it's very serious. So it's really a decision that nobody understands. We will appeal to the Supreme Court, arguing that the Nîmes Court of Appeal misapplied the law. And at that point, the decision from Nîmes will be overturned, and we will retry this case before the Court of Assizes in Lyon. And when we get to Lyon, then we have...
Were you there at that moment?
Yes, I was there for all three.
What was your opinion at that moment?
So something pretty crazy happens procedurally. That is, I become a civil party. And that's unassailable. It means I'm the victim's child. So I have every right to be a civil party. But I'm a civil party who challenges the guilt of the one being prosecuted, of my mother. And that's going to lead to some absolutely incredible things. Since there are other people who are civil parties, the family of the one who passed away, his brother, his parents, are also civil parties. But they are convinced of Edwige's guilt.
For those who don't know, what exactly is a civil party?
Actually, being a civil party is when you've been a victim, either directly or indirectly. That means you've lost a loved one, like in the survivors. And you have the right, actually, to ask for compensation for the harm you've suffered. But beyond that, it's mainly that you have the right to be part of the trial. That means you become one of the participants in the trial. And that's what's going to happen then when I take care of Bryce. And we're going to fight in this case against the civil parties who will challenge my right to be a civil party. Just like Johan's lawyer, since Johan also has a lawyer who is contesting his mother's guilt. What will happen, what will convince the jurors, is that when Johan is taken into custody, at some point at 4 in the morning, he will break down. And he will say what is expected of him. He will say, "Yes, it's my mother. Yes, it's my mother who killed him. And that's how it happened. And we hid the rifle in the garden hedge." We're obviously going to look for the rifle, but we'll never find it. And the day after he was taken into custody, when he made his so-called confession, of course, he took it back. He'll want to go see the investigating judge. He'll say he only said that because he was exhausted and being harassed by 3 or 4 police officers. Eventually, since I couldn't take it, I said what they wanted so it would end.
He wanted to make him say that, right?
Yes, absolutely. And what he's going to say, actually, we don't learn anything new in his statement that the police don't already know. So, if you want, there's nothing new except for this story about the rifle that we'll never find. And actually, that's what's going to convince the court. And when we get to the Lyon Court of Assizes, we're all wound up. We prepared a model to show how impossible it was. Well, I won't go into all the details, but there were a number of things that made it so that...
That's interesting. What is it, for example, if you could give just 1 or 2 examples of things that make it at first glance so that it's...
I'll give you an example. And actually, it's the example that will allow us to try to get the trial reviewed afterwards. We know because the police still search the place when they arrive. There's a very large garden around the house with a hedge, and at the foot of the hedge, they're going to find 2 cigarette butts. And those 2 cigarette butts aren't wet. Even though the house's automatic sprinkler system ran from 8 to 10 p.m. So we know that those 2 cigarette butts were put there after 10 p.m. There's DNA on them. We'll check the National Genetic Fingerprint Database, Fichier National Automatisé des Empreintes Génétiques, but there's no match or identity found. We arrive at the Lyon Court of Assizes with these cigarette butts, but we don't know their owner. Before the Lyon Court of Assizes, we were ready to speak, but it's been a while since we checked the National Genetic Fingerprint Database. Maybe in the meantime, there are new identities that have been added to the file, and as a result, maybe there will be a match.
Your theory is that these 2 cigarette butts, they would be the...
It's the guy who's keeping watch. It's the guy who's keeping watch. Waiting for all the lights to go out so he can give the green light to those who are going to go in. At that moment, in front of the Lyon Criminal Court, it works. And we find the identity of a guy who is known for burglaries, who has a criminal record and so on, and who belongs to a crew we know. And all those guys are known.
And those cigarette butts, they were at the residence of...
Yeah, they were in front of the door, well, basically about 10 meters from the door, well hidden behind the hedge, as if I were there, smoking and waiting to ensure it's clear before letting the others in. And so we're going to argue all that. But unfortunately, while arguing the case, we still haven't received the response from the National Genetic Fingerprint Database. And that's where the defense attorneys in this case are going to make a mistake. A fundamental mistake is that we should have asked for the case to be suspended at that point and waited for the answer. We didn't wait. That's a mistake because we think we have everything we need to get this woman acquitted. Unfortunately, she will be convicted again, still for 10 years. We will later learn from some jurors who broke the law because they spoke to us and told us what happened during the deliberation. That at first they had voted for this woman's innocence and that the president of the Court of Assizes asked them to vote again. And by harassing them repeatedly, they eventually managed to obtain this woman's conviction. A few weeks after the Lyon verdict, there's a match in the National Genetic Fingerprint Database, and we see that it's a guy known as a burglar, etc. Armed with that, we're going to try to get the trial reviewed, which is an extremely complicated procedure in France. In France, as elsewhere, the justice system dislikes admitting mistakes. So we're trying to get that. We get a request for further information, which means that the Court of Cassation, which is responsible for handling the request for review, will say, okay, maybe there's something to look into. Try investigating. I'll be brief since it could take hours.
No problem, we have time.
An investigating judge will be appointed. This investigating judge is convinced of Edwige's guilt. He will completely botch his work.
Edwige, as a result, is the...
Edwige, she's the woman. She's the one who was convicted 3 times for this case. And in the end, this additional investigation won't lead to anything because it will be botched by this investigating judge who doesn't want people to say that justice made a mistake at some point. And we won't get a retrial for this case. And today, if you want, and during all those years, I followed Bryce. Bryce grew up during this trial. Bryce grew up with this story. He built himself through this story. I can't tell you what image people have of justice in France because it's particularly degraded, to say the least. But it was very moving for me to start by assisting a kid and then end up assisting a young man. Always with the same conviction and the same determination to say, but my mother didn't kill my father. You have to see how incredibly difficult that moment was. And there's a lot of bitterness when you're a lawyer and you know that justice was wrong and you can't manage to get it to admit it. That's why it's not a failure, in the sense that I wasn't the one defending Edwige, but for Bryce. I would have really liked for this boy to win his case and finally, in some way, make amends with the justice system that he has struggled with so much for years.
It's wild. So today, after all?
Today, this woman is definitively convicted. And unless at some point, one of the guys who did this felt remorse, had cancer, was about to die. And since dying is dying, if he was going to tell the truth, we'll never know the truth. We actually know it. We know the names of the guys. I mean, with almost complete certainty. But since we can't provide any evidence, we can't have this trial reviewed.
When you first saw this case, before we move on to the next one, did you believe them right away, or did you have doubts at first?
At first, you keep some distance since it's a child, but then certain things remain troubling. And then there are Johann's confessions, which are very troubling at first, but very quickly. My conviction comes from telling myself, this kid can't. He couldn't keep up that life for years, given how much he loved his father. It's impossible. Even if it had been his mother, at some point he would have cracked. He would have said, well, yes, they argued, she grabbed a gun and it went off. It was an accident, whatever, but he couldn't have kept that life for years.
What did the other side say? Their main arguments were constant arguing, so...
Is that it?
They argued all the time. She was jealous because he made a lot more money than her. They even said things that were completely untrue. At one point, they talked about a life insurance policy. They said she will get a very large life insurance payout, and that's one of the motives. That's a mistake. The one who will get the life insurance is Bryce, who will inherit from this man. That's not his wife, it's Bryce. And actually, it's Bryce who went broke, who put all that money in to defend his mother all those years. And yet, those were incriminating elements that were served and reserved to us as much as they wanted during all 3 trials.
Has it ever happened to you, unrelated, but have you ever had a client sitting in front of you who lied to you?
Yes, this happens frequently in criminal law practice. So actually, after that, you have 2 options if you want. There are lawyers who, even after studying a case that clearly proves the guilt of the guy you're going to defend, the guy tells you, no, it wasn't me. The lawyer says, I must say it's not him, so I plead not him. Me, I can't do that. When a guy tells me it's not him, I look at the file and I see that everything incriminates him. The guy, he's being prosecuted for doing a robbery. We search his place. The weapon used in the robbery, the stolen bills, and his DNA are all at the scene. And I tell him, listen to me, there are 2 options. Either you want me to defend you, but in that case, I'll defend you by telling the truth. It's you. But I'll explain the context, why you're going to do this, because you have a life story that explains it. At a certain point in your life, you saw no other option but to commit a crime. But if you ever ask me to plead the unpleadable, which goes against the entire case file, you'll be doubly condemned, first for your guilt and again for treating them like fools. And that justice just can't stand. And when the guy insists, I step back. I can't argue something to that extent.
Has a guy ever insisted when you just wanted to finish?
Yes, that's happened to me. Usually I'm persuasive enough to make them see it's actually better for them. And actually, it happens often. Sometimes during investigations, I encounter cases where the person denies everything through 4 to 6 interrogations. And finally, we get to court, we talk for a long time. He trusts me, and I say, listen, if I plead you did it, you'll get a lighter sentence. And often it works, so the guys understand that in the end it's better. Sometimes it's a thug expression when you're fribouillis, meaning you can't get out of it. It's better to tell the truth and explain, and the fact that the guy shows up in court changing his story. Everyone relaxes saying it's okay, and he's not treating us like fools. And now we're going to listen to his reasons. We're going to listen to the explanations he can give us. And at that moment, they are heard by a court, and they take them into account.
Has it ever happened to you that you're defending someone and you realize along the way that they're actually lying to you?
Well, what has happened to me before is that I was deeply convinced of someone's innocence. I pleaded for them and I got it, meaning I got an acquittal. Not 1, but 2 for the same person who was prosecuted for murders. He was suspected of driving the shooter to the scene. We're in a context of rival gangs. At the time, we're in the 90s. It's not drugs that are the most important, it's the slot machines. The guys put slot machines in bars, and that brings in a lot of money. So they fight to get the stuff. So there are constant settling of scores. That guy's being prosecuted, but he always said, I didn't do it, it wasn't me. And I'm going to convince myself that it's not him because I don't have anything in the file that really incriminates him. If you want, I don't have any irrefutable proof of his guilt, and I'm going to plead. And at the time, I was very young. It was the early 90s. I had just arrived in the South. I think I'd been pleading in court for 3 or 4 years, maybe. And I still had that drive and enthusiasm of young lawyers. And I'm really going to fight, do everything I can for him, and I win the case. And a few years later, because people eventually start talking in the field, and when you're a criminal lawyer, they often talk to you, and I would find out that, in fact, it was him.
How do you feel? Do you have any regrets? Did you tell yourself, well, you just did your job in the end?
Yes, actually, that's it. At first it was complicated because I realized I had helped someone guilty be found innocent. And then I told myself, it's not you, it's the case. In a way, if the case had made it possible to establish this guy's guilt with certainty, you could have done whatever you wanted. He would have been found guilty and sentenced. But the job of a lawyer, I'm going to be shocking. The job of a lawyer isn't to seek the truth. The question you have to ask yourself when you're a defense lawyer is, should you? In this case, are there elements that allow you to be certain of the guilt of the person I'm defending? If not, you have to argue for doubt. Doubt benefits the accused. That's what the law tells us. So I actually pleaded in accordance with my professional and ethical obligations. So deep down, even if morally it feels a bit strange, I did what I had to do. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done my job.
You mentioned another case, the Helen case. which isn't related to this. Do you discuss it in the book?
Yes, it's the last case I talk about in the book, the one about Helene. It's one of the saddest and most revealing cases of human madness that I've ever had to plead. This woman is of Spanish origin, and every summer she goes to spend her vacation in Spain with her family, where she meets up with her cousins. And one of her first cousins, she finds him very handsome, and then she ends up getting together with him, falling in love with this boy. They will live in Spain at first. He already seems quite violent, he drinks a lot, but she is madly in love with him. And then in Spain, when you marry someone, it's maybe even stronger than in France. Religious beliefs are very important, so people don't separate. They'll end up coming to France because she works in France. He'll come too, and they'll have a child, a little girl. This girl is born with a minor disability, so at age 12, her mental age is about 5 or 6. The beatings continue. He drinks more and more. She just works and he does nothing. It's getting harder for her. Still, he's not a bad dad and takes good care of his daughter. Eventually, it just became too much. The violence became too much. That's why she's going to leave him. He goes back to Spain, but gets a normal court decision where he has visitation rights to the child. And so regularly he comes to see the child in France, but actually every time he comes to see the child in France, it's to try to get her back. He keeps telling her, we're made for each other. He says, I'm getting help, I'm going to rehab, and so on. This happens several times without issues. He takes the child, spends time with her, takes her to parks, etc. It goes really well. As long as he has hope deep down that Helen will come back, things go well with the child. And then the last time he goes there, she's very clear with him. She tells him there's no point in trying, it won't work anymore, we'll never be together again. And I think it's at that moment that this man becomes aware. Because with Helene, it's over. He won't have her anymore. He's going to come to get the little girl. He's going to go there for the first weekend. It's going to go normally. He brings her back as planned. And then the following weekend, it's planned again that he'll take the little girl. Helene brings her to him. They meet. She gives him the little girl. Then she kisses her daughter goodbye. And after she has already kissed her, her ex-husband says to her, kiss the little one again? You never know what might happen. At that moment she thinks, oh, he didn't see. She kisses her daughter again. And then he's going to leave. He has to be home at 5 o'clock. And the whole time he's not there, he keeps sending messages to Helene, telling her, we need to get back together, and so on. And then she tells him, no, 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 over and over again. At 5 o'clock, he still hasn't returned with the child. And then she starts to worry. And he tells her, he starts sending her strange messages saying, I did something crazy. You'll see, you'll read about it in the newspapers. She doesn't understand and she completely panics. So she immediately goes to the police to warn them about what's happening. The police take the case seriously and search everywhere, but can't find him. The little girl never comes home. And finally, 2 days later, they find this guy buying beers in a supermarket. Witnesses are being sought, and his photo is in all newspapers. They're going to arrest him. We still have no news about the girl. He's in police custody. Of course, we're going to question him. He'll end up saying there was an accident. The little girl drowned in the Rhone. We're in Avignon. The Rhone runs along the edge of the city. She drowned in the Rhone. And then little by little, he'll explain that, in fact, he killed his daughter. That's what we call in Spain, it's a particular crime. It's called a proxy femicide. That is when you often it happens that when men are rejected and can't handle the separation, since you're no longer mine, you'll never belong to anyone else, and they kill their ex-wife. Proxy femicide actually is when you kill what is most precious to the woman in the world, so that she suffers for the rest of her life. And that's what this man is going to do. We're going to find that little girl in the reeds by the Rhone River. Her feet and hands are tied. She was tied up by her father, who threw her into the water. Anyway, it's a horrible case. And so, that man will be tried, will get the maximum sentence in Avignon, and he will be sentenced to life imprisonment. He is going to appeal this decision. We don't understand why. Helene explains it's because as long as there's a trial, he sees me and maintains a connection with me. That's what he wants.
Are you representing Helene then?
Yes, I represent Helene, the aunt, and the whole family. And the crazy thing, if I may say so, I represent because they are first cousins. I represent the little girl's grandfather, who is also the accused's father. I have my father by my side and will remember it always. The testimony of this father who comes to the stand, he's a big Spanish man, very proud, etc. And at one point, he looked over at the defendant's box. He didn't look at his son, but he looked toward the defendant's box. He said, "This man is not a man." And that was it. He was talking about his own son. That gives you an idea of the emotion there must have been at that moment. And I often think about Helene, because this woman, truly, what was done to her, I think there's nothing worse you could do to someone. He killed his own daughter. It was his own child. But she showed such courage, such strength, because she managed to come to the stand and testify twice since there were 2 trials. And I really keep in mind the face of this woman, ravaged by tears, but you know, the tears that flow in silence. The sadness and suffering are so intense they can't stop. I felt like I was seeing, you know, in the rocks sometimes, you see that the river leaves marks, grooves. She had that on her face from crying so much. So we managed to get this man sentenced to the maximum penalty. But still, after leaving the trial, Helen told me, "But if he ever gets out, he'll come after me."
What's the maximum we can get like that?
Life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. That's the maximum you can get in those 4 cases.
So basically, does that mean he'll serve 22 years no matter what?
Yes.
And normally?
He will do more, because if you want, so that at the end of the minimum sentence, we can consider releasing a guy like that. 2 psychiatric experts must submit reports stating they no longer consider him dangerous. Before a guy like that is considered no longer dangerous, it's going to take some time, so I think he'll serve more than that.
And does he have lawyers to defend him?
Yes, of course.
What are the opposing lawyers arguing then?
I wouldn't want to be in their shoes. Then it was complicated.
Yes.
He pleads the man's insanity. He argues that this man could never handle being rejected by Helen, the alcohol. He brings all of that up. When you're in criminal court and see the jurors at a certain point, jurors arrive in a criminal court without knowing why they're there until it's explained to them.
Oh, they don't know? Okay.
No, the president of the criminal court, male or female, will begin the trial by giving what's called the report. That means they will give a summary of the case, and that's how the jurors find out why they're there. And when you see the jurors, at the end of the report, put down their pens and cross their arms. When you see the defendant's box, you know it's over. They can do what they want, it's done.
You also mentioned the Choki case. He's a former boxer, I believe, involved in multiple murder cases in the slot machine business.
This story is crazy because I'm defending this guy so with all the passion and conviction I have of his innocence. He's co-accused with the alleged shooter in the first trial before the Avignon Criminal Court. Actually, he has 2 cases against him. One case where the victim's name is Serge Martin, and the other case where the victim's name is Charlie Lecouls. All of them are thugs, right? We're in that world. We could be in a Michel Audiard dialogue. It would be the same. Me, I pleaded with Buny the madman, Dede the deaf. Well, that was me. And it's true that when you're a young lawyer and you end up in something like this, you wonder, am I in a crime movie or is this real life? And so they're both being prosecuted. Both received 20-year sentences in the first trial. They appealed the decision. During the appeal, it's also a chance to mention the remarkable lawyer Henri Leclerc, who recently passed away and was a leading figure of the bar. Henri Leclerc defends the shooter, and I therefore defend the driver. And I obtain the acquittal of the driver, but Henri Leclerc does not obtain the acquittal of the shooter, who will also be convicted. From the moment I obtain the acquittal in a first case of Choki, the second case goes to the Avignon Court of Assizes, where both are acquitted. And it was only several years later that I would learn that, in the end, most likely, he really was the driver of the one who fired. I found out from someone else who was at the scene, who was never troubled, but who was also one of those who took part in the elimination.
That's crazy.
But actually, when you're a lawyer, what's also crazy is that you're bound by professional secrecy. If you come to my office tomorrow and tell me, look, I slit 3 people's throats and they're in my garage, I can't go to the police, I'm not allowed. It's pretty crazy. And so actually I received some confidences from certain people that sometimes make my hair stand on end, but I can't do anything about it. I'm not allowed to talk about it.
Have you ever had someone ask you to defend them, but you think to yourself, I can't do anything, it's lost? In any case, they're going to get the maximum sentence, or they're going to... Well, either way, I never will.
I've practiced criminal law for over 35 years. I defend many victims, but I refuse to defend certain defendants. Since I often defend children who have been victims of violence, especially sexual violence and women, I have never been able to defend a rapist. Only once. I come from the Paris bar. At first, I was sworn in at the Paris bar in 1988. I stayed for 2 years before moving to the south of France. And when you're a young lawyer, you can be assigned as a court-appointed attorney by your bar president, meaning the head of the lawyers tells you you're going to defend this person and you don't argue. Unless the person writes to the bar president, requesting someone else. And I was assigned to defend a guy who had raped his daughter. He was in prison. I go to see him in prison. I was very young. I was 27, 28 years old. I go to see him in prison. I run into a big guy. The caricature of the Soa, the brute, the guy, really impressive. I told him, sir, you'll need to write to the Bar Association president to get someone else assigned to you. He looks at me, surprised, and asks why. I say, if it were up to me, I'd put 2 bullets in your head so I couldn't defend you, sir. He said, okay, I get it, and wrote the letter. That's how I was relieved of that case. Later, when it really happened that I had to defend people who had done terrible things. But each time we agreed. That is to say, I never pleaded the indefensible. I can't plead someone's innocence when everything in the case certainly incriminates them. But on the other hand, I have pleaded cases for people who had done truly abominable things, but who admitted to those acts. And at that point, what interests me is trying not to find excuses for them. There are no excuses, but to explain the reason behind things. Because judging, as we often say, judging is understanding. And if you don't understand, you're not judging, you're condemning. And you have to judge people based on who they are and what they've done.
There are cases nothing to do with the questions, but ones that you particularly enjoyed working on, or where you thought, this is really great. Actually, is there everything to defend him?
Yeah.
You see, you tell me.
Yes, well, yes, there are. Actually, there are often. Often. Maybe at the beginning of my career more, because you have to remember that at the start of my career, DNA didn't exist. We didn't have all this scientific evidence that is irrefutable. We often had what we called a body of clues, like the person being near the scene or events.
Do you have an example where you truly thought, really?
Yes, I had an example. And by the way, I'd like to say hello to her. It's Marie-Christine. At the time, we were in a period where there was no appeal. At the time when a criminal court made a decision, French law considered it to be the expression of the people's will. The people, the jurors, judged, so you couldn't appeal their decision. And I found myself appointed to defend this Marie-Christine, who was being prosecuted for the murder of her lover.
It's still something though.
It's not bad, it's not bad. And the place, it's a bit of a secluded house. The guy was renovating his house. She was with him, and at one point she calls saying, there, I found him at the bottom of the stairs. He's dead. Actually, when the police arrive and they see the body, yes, he's dead because he was stabbed after all. And when they lift the body, there's a pool of blood, and in the pool of blood, there's the footprint of Marie-Christine. So we think, well, and so she's prosecuted for that. We arrive at the criminal court, and at the time the criminal court was in Carpentras. We arrive at the criminal court, and I think to myself, what am I going to be able to say? Because it's a bit complicated. Sure, she always said, no, it's not me, it's not me, it's not me. She explained that actually the owner of the place had come. He had gotten into an argument with him, and apparently that's what led to the death of that man. And then I realized that this man, the owner, is a former police officer, and I'm going to come up with a theory, an absolutely unbelievable story by saying, but yes, but actually. And I actually cast doubt in the juror's mind by saying, but Marie-Christine had no reason to kill her lover since she loved him very much. Besides, he was the one who provided for her needs, he was the one who financed her life, and so on. On the other hand, the police officer had a conflict with him. Well, the former police officer had a conflict with him. They didn't agree on the price of the house. They didn't agree on the financing of the renovations. Why did the former police officer take that route when leaving the house instead of going straight? And in the end, I ended up planting doubt in the minds of some of the jurors, since at the time there were 9 jurors and 3 professional judges. And for a guilty verdict to be reached, there had to be a 2/3 majority of the votes, that is, out of 12. 8 people had to say he was guilty. If you look at it the other way, if you convince 5 jurors of innocence, the person cannot be convicted. And she is acquitted. They go to deliberate, and after 5 or 6 hours of deliberation, I was sure she was going to be convicted. I had done what I could because, well, I didn't know. I had some elements that might have allowed me to create doubt, but it was really very subtle. And she is acquitted. And at that moment, the acquittal is final because the prosecutor cannot appeal this decision. And for years, it remained a story that we talked about with those who were there. The public prosecutor. You know, when you're in a small court, you end up knowing everyone. Even if we're not friends, we respect each other and we often talk about the cases. And that case kept us busy for years. We talked about Marie-Christine for years and years.
Did she ever confess anything to you at any point?
Oh, no. She always told me she didn't do it. No, I couldn't have done that if she had told me, if it was me. Because she also had such a life story that I could have argued her personality. I could have argued so many things. Even if found guilty and sentenced, she likely wouldn't have received a very harsh punishment because she had an abominable life.
There's one last case that I thought was interesting to cover in the episode. I don't know if you talk about it in the book or not, but it's the case of Magali. I think it's a rather unique case because I believe the person you defended later became your wife, or maybe I'm wrong.
Yes, well, if that's it, that's exactly right.
How did that happen? What happened?
Actually, I met Magali at that time. I'm already working with Jean-Luc Delarue, who was a producer who unfortunately passed away and who was a famous television host in France. In 2006, this man received a daily 2 p.m. time slot on France 2 for a show featuring guests sharing stories on specific topics. And then he wanted to bring someone with him. A team of experts. Just like in the United States, on American talk shows you have the host, plus a psychiatrist, psychologist, lawyer, and dietitian. Well, and every time the topic calls for it. Experts are available to support the host and explain how things work. In 2006, he invited me to join the show and I accepted. As life goes on, he stops hosting the show and Sophie Davant becomes the new host. In 2011, we did a show themed I Witnessed a Crime, and I see some of the guests here. A young woman named Magali, who is there because she witnessed her brother's murder. They were both on separate motorcycles when they encountered a reckless driver. And this madman ended up chasing her brother with his car. He aggressively targeted and tried to run him over to kill him.
Did he hit the motorcycle with the car? Was Magali behind or only a witness?
She wasn't on the same motorcycle. She was on another motorcycle, but she was following behind and she saw all of it happen live. And I must say, struck by the intensity of the emotion she gives off, by the sadness that is hers. And it was very strange because she had a look deeply sad, yet always smiling. You know, those people who always try to hide their deep sorrow behind a dazzling smile. It was quite impressive. The trial hadn't taken place. And a few months later, she asked me to defend her family, herself and her parents, etc. Her whole family at the trial. I'm doing this in Colmar, 2013.
What's at stake? It's 2?
Find the accused guilty and sentence them. And the trial will take place. This boy will be found guilty and sentenced. And then I will. At that time, I was married. I had 3 children with another wife. So we kept in touch, but she was also married. Well, that's it. We each have our own lives, but we still keep in touch and write to each other regularly with updates. I welcome her daughter for an internship. I've known her at every stage of her life, in 8th grade, in 9th grade, and then later when she was a law student. And then later, life happens. I'm going to get divorced. She's also going to separate from her husband, and we are going to grow closer. And today we really are husband and wife.
That's crazy. And in the end, did you manage to make sure the defendant was?
Yes, well, not as much as we would have liked, but that's also something important to say, that when you defend victims, you must immediately tell them the sentence will be handed down. No sentence can match their suffering, because losing a child, brother or mother is incomparable. They often say, we get a life sentence, meaning we'll have this for life, pain inside us. Whereas the person who committed the act will be sentenced. He'll do 10, 15, 20 years in prison, and then he'll get out and resume his life. Indeed, that's not what we should be looking for. When defending victims, what matters most is acknowledging their words and ensuring the person is found guilty. That's it. Guilty of the facts. That's what matters. The sentence isn't your decision. Society punishes its members when they do something truly abominable. But you have no control over that.
Have you ever had people break down during a trial who suddenly confess everything or something like that?
I've already experienced it as a civil party, being on the other side. I remember a guy, a former legionnaire. By the way, I can mention his name since the trial was public, right? Georges Stinis, prosecuted with torture and acts of barbarity against 3 women. In fact, the process was always the same. He would start by seducing women, he would get together with them, and little by little, he would make them experience horror until by torturing them, in short, abominable things. This man denies all the facts. I am here to defend the 3 women he victimized in succession. He denies all the facts. Constantly, he says she's making it all up. When we had intercourse, it was consensual. I was never violent, etc. This guy is such a physical monster that I remember being in an investigating judge's office with my 3 clients. Me, his lawyer, him, and above him, 4 gendarmes like this. Just in case the guy moves, even with 4 of us, we weren't sure we could stop him. So we weren't really comfortable, it wasn't great. We go to the trial. There we run into Lionel Mathieu, a public prosecutor I know well, who became a friend and was formerly a lawyer. And, the criminal courts are often quite large, and the distance between the defendant and the prosecution is very significant. Additionally, the public prosecutor was elevated in his box, and I see my Lionel Mathieu at that moment, because in a criminal court we're going to address the facts. At some point, the accused is questioned about the facts, and we proceed to their interrogation. The judge questions him, but he keeps denying everything. I see my Lionel Mathieu, he's just a little guy.
Lionel Mathieu, who is he?
He's the public prosecutor, representing society and explaining the reasons in a trial. He believes the man is guilty and recommends a sentence.
Yes, that works.
So that's the prosecution then. And I see him coming down, and with a voice, he gently starts talking to her.
To the defendant then?
To the defendant. Mr. Stinis, don't you think it's time to clear your conscience? Don't you think maybe it's time to tell these women that you regret what you've done? And like that, but very gently, while everyone else was always speaking to him very aggressively, and as time goes on, he gets closer and closer. At some point, he's right there, he's just like you and me. And then I see this kind of giant completely collapse. He looks at him and says, "You're right, they're right. What I'm being accused of, it's true." Those are truly incredible emotional moments. I've experienced them a few times in my career, and often in cases involving morals, by the way, often in cases of us. I have another similar story from Privas where a man had detained his stepdaughters and always denied it. At the last moment he said, "No, but it's true." Then in a faint voice, "No, but it's true." Everyone pauses and says, "Excuse me?" He replies, "Yes, it's true."
At that moment, does his lawyer panic or just think, well, that's it?
This often occurs because the defense lawyer has already told the man, "Listen, sir, all evidence points to you." So maybe it's time to clear your conscience. It's rarely a surprise for the defense lawyer.
Has it ever happened to you to be afraid, by the way, at some point? For example, you're representing someone, like you said, the guy is tough. Aren't you ever afraid that one day, I don't know, he gets out of prison and he will
not feel at ease? Oh yes, sometimes. Yes, sometimes we're not at ease. Well, first you should know that wearing a robe is a protection. It's better than a bulletproof vest, because for thugs, messing with people in robes is too costly. If you're caught harming someone in a robe, like a judge or lawyer, the penalties are usually very severe. There's a certain respect for that, but I've been threatened many times in criminal courts by defendants.
Oh, really?
Guys say, "We'll meet again." I just say, "I'm in the phone book." What else can I say?
Seriously?
Yeah, it happens. But generally, the people who make threats are rarely the ones who actually do something. Exactly, you have to be more wary of those who stay silent.
Thank you, Master Mark Gegere, for this first episode. Honestly, I didn't talk much, and mostly just listened to you. It was super interesting. It was really amazing.
All the better.
Let's mention it again. Mark, you wrote a book covering 11 cases, some internal. Is this your first book, or have you written others?
I co-wrote one a few years ago with a journalist named The Crime and the Child, but unfortunately it's no longer available. It's out of print. And it was about cases I was involved in where I defended children.
And this book, then, for those who might not have followed from the beginning, what is it about?
This book covers 11 trials and more than just the trials themselves. It tells 11 stories, 11 encounters with families who lost someone in dramatic circumstances, who were murdered. And it's really about the whole process. That is, I explained from meeting these people, the investigation, the inquiry, the trial. My closing arguments are also in there. And I really explain from the victim's perspective what it all means, this whole judicial process.
Very interesting for those interested. The link is in the first line of the description, and it's also available in all bookstores, if I understood correctly, published by Maroy. That's the end of the first episode. If you want to be on StoryCube, the email is shown here. You can share a brief story or anything you'd like. We'd love to have you on StoryCube. This was Noah with StoryCube. Have a very good evening. Bye.